Hey, welcome everybody to yet another week of the Gen X guys. This is our, I think, fourth show now. So we're still
Sure.
moving along, still figuring it
Moving
out.
on. Or we're
Yeah,
just, gonna do it until I don't know.
that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do. Really drive attendance by not even knowing
Not really
ourselves where we're
caring.
going. Got it.
Yeah. Do we really know where we're going? Do we know or even really care? Or are we just gonna keep doing this
I don't
because
even care
we
as
have
much
nothing
as
better to fucking do? That's what it is. That's like the life of a Gen Xer now. We have really nothing going on in our life, so we just have to do random shit like this.
well, yeah. I mean, the days of growing up where you just hung out with your friends all day, outside, somewhere, wherever, didn't really matter where.
Yep.
You know, nowadays,
Like,
today's world, it's like, I mean, you get older, shit just
it's
changes
different.
anyway.
It's different. I don't
Yeah.
know. There's a lot of advantages nowadays. Like, think about it. Think about if we had the pandemic when we were in the 80s, like in the early 80s or whatever.
We wouldn't
Yeah,
have cared. Nobody would have cared. Nobody would have cared. They would have just laughed it off. Most
you're right.
likely said,
That's a good point.
yeah,
Would how much did the media drive the hysteria? Yeah,
exactly. And none of that
that's
was
a good
really
point.
sensitive at that point. So they wouldn't have cared.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
if they did, even
let's
if they
just
did, it's like, dude, suck it up. You're fine. You can go to
throw,
school.
throw some dirt on it, and you'll
Throw
be fine.
and nobody cares. You're fine.
Yeah,
Just
have some chicken noodle soup. Watch Days of Our Lives and General Hospital and
all my
what was
children.
that?
All my
And
children.
what's a game show? I'm forgetting it. Price is
Oh,
Right.
yes,
Shit like
always
that.
watch Bob Barker's Prices Right. That's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah.
what I did every time I was sick.
Oh
Lay
yeah.
on that couch, kick that TV on, all 12 channels,
Right, right.
and figure out what I could watch at that point.
How many do we have? We had channel 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, and then I went to the UHF ones. The 44 was the big one for us.
Dude, by the way,
320.
good 80s movie, UHF, with Weird Al Yankovic.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Anybody who's not of our age and maybe listening, great
Want a
fucking movie.
little flashback to what life. Actually, Stranger Things was really good when it came to that, like, especially the first season.
True. Yeah, that's true. They really pulled out the 80s, the whole
The feel.
D&D, everything related to that. And they've kind of held on to that, but
Yeah.
they haven't focused so much about really pulling up the 80s other than the music.
Yeah.
Right? The music's been the key piece.
It was really just that first season. I mean, I understand they went on with the storyline, but I think it was cool for us to see that back in the, little nostalgia, the arcade and the bikes and not being able to get a hold of somebody unless you actually were in front of them or they actually got home.
That is true. Yeah, that's true.
That
was always the fun part.
Yeah.
But that's also, going back to it, like even I'm sure the 60s and 50s, totally different time periods of when people did shit. Like
there's always pluses and minuses.
Yeah. I mean, hell, think about the Roman kids, man. What did they do? They just ran around the streets of dirt and probably
No, you know what? I was
variation of tag and stabby stab, stuff like that.
do a little Caesar with them. Hey, two brother.
Caesar.
Shit, you killed him. No, but I was talking to my brother, and I don't know if I brought it up before, but I was born in Cleveland, even though I was raised in the Bay Area.
Nobody cares, but go on.
Nobody cares. But
not about Cleveland, at least. They care about the Bay Area.
Just no, yeah. I still care about Cleveland.
Oh, sorry, that was uncalled for.
Still hometown.
Continue on.
Fuck, where was I going? All right. But I went out like 3 summers with my grandmother to Cleveland, and we took Greyhound.
Oh yeah, that's right. You mentioned that.
Yeah.
Back then, what was that, like mid 80s, right? When you were doing that, early 80s.
Early 80s, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even I think the earliest probably might have actually been like late 70s.
How was
painful. I don't know how, like, sitting on a bus for 3 days, doing nothing, like zero.
Right, you had no smartphones. All you had was probably any books that you had to bring.
Yeah.
Paper and crayons and coloring and entertain yourself.
She would give me cards. So we would try to play I don't even know what we played. I remember we brought cards with us. I just don't remember what we played. Yeah, that's just memory.
Probably like Go Fish,
yeah, things like that.
Stuff like that. Probably gin rummy, because she's older, so that made sense for that time.
Oh, we always played gin rummy. That's the one game that I played with my grandmother.
Yeah. Dominoes, couldn't play the bones.
No.
Roll dice with her, gamble.
I did the dice. Like I would get dice, and again, it was just things to occupy you.
Yeah.
But you know what I remember now? This is I wonder what age people have to be before they don't know about this. But remember being in bus terminals and they had these little seats that had a TV that you put a quarter in and you can watch TV for like 15 minutes. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I think honestly, those kind of went away in probably mid 90s.
I would
So
think so. Yeah.
anybody after that probably doesn't even know of it unless they like
No.
catch a show that talks about it and then
Right.
maybe it piques their interest to go look.
But
Otherwise,
literally, yeah, it was like you would say, I mean, they have it now, but now it's, totally different. You weren't watching broadcast TV in in like where we were, like New Mexico or wherever we would go, because we would actually go the southern route and then up north. So like I remember going through like Arizona, New Mexico, and then up through that area. Like we would come through the southern part to get into Ohio.
yeah. So you went
Yeah,
across country. My trips usually, if we went of any real distance when I was growing up in the 80s, was more like Montana. So
yeah,
being out of California Bay Area, we drive up to Montana. We did a nice couple of different road trips. One we did on my uncle's RV, where there were like 8 of us in it,
yeah,
or motorhome, 8 of us in it, and so we hit some of the different states, which was nice. Actually, when Mount St. Helens erupted in '82, that was the year we did the trip, and so
mm,
we went up. We actually went through that area by
where it happened.
where it happened. Not
Yeah, yeah.
obviously right directly
Oh,
around
yeah, I
Mount
know,
St.
yeah.
Helens because they wouldn't let you that close, but like
Right.
um, through Yellowstone, going through there, you could get. I mean, we just saw tore up trees and that were destroyed because it had
Yeah.
bottles of ash we got filled because it
Dude,
was all over the
yeah,
ground. Might
all
as
over the
well
place.
sell
We
that
used
shit
to
on eBay.
Here's another one for people from the 80s, right? From the 80s and 90s. One of my mom's best friends, they had a van conversion.
A van
You know,
conversion?
a van conversion. So like the old Econoline vans that they would put like the bed and seats and stuff like
Yeah,
the mini RVs, but they were actually part of a club where people like would paint all on the side of the van and like make them like really make them custom. But I remember we used to go to these every once in a while. We used to go to these big meets where, again, everybody just, I mean, us kids would sleep outside in the tents, of course, but like, all the parents would be in these, they're just a shit ton of just van conversions,
yeah,
which
that's
now
true.
people make those now, but they were very different in the 80s. Now they're using those, Sprinter vans, which are really cool. And they throw a lot of stuff in there like that to make
Yeah,
like, like a mini motorhome.
and you bring up an interesting one too. You mentioned camping. So camping then versus today. Like today, going camping is very
Yeah.
difficult because, like Yosemite, for instance, a very hot spot for campers. Like you
Oh
have
yeah.
to book time. Like back in the day, we just could go out to like any lake
It's
out there
easy.
in California and camp, and you wouldn't worry about like. I mean, there were campgrounds, so you still have to go to a campground, but it wouldn't be like overloaded with loads of people. You'd still
It's
be able to
amazing.
enjoy the lakes and have fun, and pretty
Well,
much that
also,
was it. Like there were no TVs, there's no smartphones. You just pretty much were out there enjoying everything around you
yeah. And this
and
is also
going
going to
off. I'd
sound,
go off for miles with my cousins, and we're only like 12. And we're in the wilderness, right? So the
yeah,
parents don't care. They're like, just
yeah.
be back before the sun goes down.
Also, like there's so many more restrictions now. Like one fire happens, and it's not to downplay the effects of wildfires, like especially that happened in California, but one fire happens, and then it creates this overreaction to closing it down, not allowing people in certain areas, or even closing off. Like I remember when I was a Boy Scout, like we would go to Mount Shasta in that area, but now a lot of it seems like it's more closed off during certain times of the year and like more restrictive.
Yeah.
But actually, one of the fun ones when I first bought. Remember my old RV? So I used to have a 1992 Class A 34-foot long RV.
That you bought
And
when again? Just so people get a sense of the difference of
oh shit, yeah,
timing.
this was probably 2005.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was around
I was only
2005.
13 years old.
It was old.
So,
I
yeah.
had no, I had no idea. I overpaid for it, and I should have never bought it. Honestly, it was one of those where I had no piece of advice. Anybody like just like a boat, motorcycle, or anything that's like unique like that, bring somebody with you who knows what the fuck they're doing.
Are you
Because
sure
I
you
had
bought it in
no idea.
'05 though? I don't
Huh?
think you bought it in '05. I think you bought it later than '05.
Well, no, because Chris and Jessica were still in, or my youngest son and my niece, they were still in height or booster seats. They weren't that
Well, I
old.
mean, when we drove out here to Vegas for the first time when my first house was made, that was in
Yeah.
'06, and you didn't have it then
Hmm. Maybe it was later.
because we would have done a road trip at that point. I think you're thinking it probably was a little bit.
Well,
I mean,
I also had a
first
lot
off,
of
you're
work to
old.
do on it.
You're not going to remember specific time frames,
Yeah.
so that's fine. We'll say
I have a
somewhere in the
mid
mid to
2000s.
late early 2000, 2000s, like
Sure. Over
2005
mid,
to
yeah.
2010, somewhere around there.
2001 to 2009. Pretty
No, I
narrow
don't. No,
range.
it wasn't 2001. I just said you didn't have
I
it.
know, fine, because I said that my youngest was born. You're right.
Anyway,
But
continue. Sorry.
first of all, so we decided to go to Clear Lake in just north of the San Francisco Bay Area, and didn't really realize how bad the suspension was on it because I wasn't even going that fast, and the thing was just totally swaying. I mean, it just like people were getting sick, and I wasn't. And okay, I do usually drive really fast, but we go to Clear Lake, and I hadn't been to Clear Lake in 20 years. I hadn't been to Clear Lake since I was a Boy Scout, like in early 80s. So, but we get up there, and that's when we kind of find out it's not exactly the family fun area that it used to be in the 80s. There's a lot of
A lot more.
there's a lot of questionable people, let's just say, being polite about. There's a lot of people who don't, like who were recently incarcerated who are up there. There's a lot of drug use and a lot of stuff like that. It's not exactly.
Do you think they were literally making that their home out there,
Oh
or
yeah, yeah.
you just saw them visiting?
We did an RV park, and almost all the RVs there were like permanent residents, and it just
So that's an interesting good point too, because you see that a lot more now. Like back in the Bay Area, I saw even in a recent trip to Pacifica, I saw again an area where a bunch of RVs were parked in rows
yeah,
and people were just living out of that. In LA, I've seen that too in areas where people just
go
cost
in
of
groups.
living is high. But to your point, yeah, like specifically in California, cost of
Yeah,
living is so high. Like I'm not surprised, but that's interesting. I mean, to see that you're seeing that up in like Clear Lake, that's crazy.
yeah, there were a lot there, but I was surprised. Like driving around a little bit, it just wasn't. There's always that nostalgia. Like you have that idea of I remember it as a kid, right? And
Yeah.
I remember Clear Lake as a kid, like going on the lake, and Clear Lake's not really that clear anymore, and it's not as nice as it used to be. And the area is not. I said we went to like 2 or 3 campgrounds, and they were all like that, where it just wasn't. We had young kids, like I said, all our kids were elementary school age at that time, and
Yeah.
yeah, no, we didn't let them wander off at all. They kind of stayed in that one area, but yeah,
Well, yeah, there's a difference. I agree. Like, and it's funny because we grew up where we just did whatever we wanted and parents didn't care. I mean, they cared. They wanted you to come back alive, ideally, but
that was about it.
yeah, that they weren't worried that something was going to happen to you. I guess is the point.
Yeah.
Whereas today, like even for myself with my kids, I'd let them go off, but I'd still kind of keep an eye out for where they're at. I wouldn't let them go too far, like so far out that I couldn't get to them as quickly if I needed to.
Right.
And yeah, I think that's gotten worse. Like it's gotten
definitely much worse.
for a lot of places now.
Good.
I was just gonna say, I mean, for a lot of places, definitely. I don't know if it's hard to say every single state. I'm sure there's certain families that probably just don't care and let their kids go anywhere. But
Depends.
The percentage, I guess, is my point, is like down quite dramatically from where it was back in like 70s, 80s, even early 90s. And I think that's the advent of the media growth that's caused a lot of the fear factor.
Well, like what was that one boy's name? Collins. What was his first name?
Yeah, Kerry Collins, I think it was. No, not Kerry Collins. That was, that's the Carolina quarterback. Sorry. He's fine. But there was that kid Collins from the Bay Area.
Yeah.
Who
was abducted.
Who was abducted. And that was probably the first big real.
Yeah, remember that?
Yeah. That was the big, that was the really that and the remember the Night Stalker?
Oh yeah.
I know that was some crazy stuff. So, but anyway, to your point, what were you saying?
No, I was just saying, like there was like that.
Kevin Collins, by the way, Kevin Collins.
Kevin Collins. Like, yeah, I was just looking up, and I just also
back in '84. Just
84.
Yeah, it was 84.
But that was like, but they show stats where, like, who abducts your children or adopts children hasn't changed. Like the stats show that it's people that they know. Like, and it's like a vast majority. It's not like 50-50. It's like 95%, where it's people that know the kids. Like stranger abductions isn't that high. I
True.
mean,
It's usually those within the neighborhood that have seen the kids enough to know their patterns.
right. And so, they say that like even though stranger abductions really never increased, it was that paranoia that people got. And not to say that it's not valid, and I don't, brush it off lightly, especially for anybody who had their kids abducted, but it's just like this whole thing where a lot of the change, kind of like what you said, like with the pandemic, is a lot of the paranoia and what they hear. Like, I mean, I remember when Kevin Collins got abducted because it was nonstop coverage when that happened. I mean, it was a huge thing, especially with us growing up in the Bay Area. We may have saw it more or at least earlier, but it was huge back then. And I remember like in elementary school, I took the bus home. I literally from fourth grade, even before that, like where we went to elementary school, I had to walk to the bus stop, take the bus home, which was about 15 minutes, and then walk home from there. And that was, I mean, I walked to school since kindergarten. It was close back then, but my son's elementary school, they had to be dropped off by a parent or by an adult, somebody of age. Like it wasn't even allowed for them to walk in by themselves or leave campus without an adult with them.
Yeah.
But it's just a total change in how everybody perceives the danger too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting how like the perception today is helped driven by the fact that you get the info. Like you mentioned in the past, I mean, we had newspapers and we had local TV. So local news would probably get it from a national, not even a national thing, because CNN wasn't really popular at that point. So they get it from a national branch, like maybe.
Did you have cable?
Did I have cable back then?
Yeah.
Not immediately. Not for. I mean, we used rabbit airs back then for quite a period of time until.
I think it's 80. I was actually the one who bought cable. It wasn't until I started working and make my own money that I got cable.
Yeah, we got cable before that. Yeah. My dad got in cable because I remember HBO. HBO's old opening where you see it going down the street, the whole HBO, and eventually
towards the lights, and then the spinning on the
back, and it's HBO altogether. So yeah.
Actually, I remember when we first got it. I don't remember what channel it had, but it had My Mannequin on. Remember, or something like that. Or
you mean Mannequin the movie?
Was it just Mannequin?
Yeah,
okay, it was just Mannequin. But fuck you, shut up. Don't I see that laugh? You're gonna laugh at me. See it. But that was on. Like, for those who don't remember, but like whenever they had their new movie, they would play it nonstop throughout the whole month. And I must have watched it like 20 times.
Yeah, definitely every Saturday night at 8 is when they'd premiere it.
Yeah.
And then to your point, then they'd play it for the rest of the month, probably like every, I don't know, at least twice a day.
Yeah.
In certain times.
And
they have a lot of content. Yeah, they have a lot of content. They were taking older movies that had come out, which was really the first time you could start seeing movies from the past that you might have liked or you didn't see before.
Yeah, yeah.
They also had Fraggle Rock. They had some great shows. Don't forget Fraggle Rock.
I love Fraggle Rock.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
That was like the cable Sesame Street, basically. Yeah, maybe not so much. Sesame Street you learned. But Fraggle Rock.
Fraggle was just fun.
More of an adventure. Which was pretty cool. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, Fraggle Rock was awesome.
I think they tried bringing it back a couple times, but never quite as good as the original. Yeah. So let me ask you this, because we're talking about, you mentioned Mannequin. What's that one?
My Mannequin.
Huh? The Mannequin? Yeah. It's called Mannequin, but it's fine. It stars Kim Cattrall, by the way, in case people were wondering who's in the movie.
Yeah.
And
yeah, right.
Forgetting the guy's name. He's part of the Brat Pack from the 80s as well, but McCarthy or something like that.
Andrew McCarthy.
Andrew McCarthy. Thank you. So, what's, out of curiosity, you've seen remakes of movies over the decades here from that stuff, but what's like an 80s movie that you'd like to see a remake of?
None.
Because they recently announced Highlander. It's going to be remade.
That's true. Okay, that's a good point. And because it has Cavill on it, I think that it's going to actually be good. And they're giving him a lot of control.
And they're also...
He's a nerd.
Well, yeah, he is a nerd. Definitely. That's why Witcher was so great.
and that's why nobody's going to watch the next season of it because
No, it ended as of from my perspective. It ended
it
already.
ended with him. Yeah,
but like for Highlander,
that's a good one.
yeah,
I forgot about that.
But that's going to be remade. I mean, and that movie came out back in like 81, 82.
But it's not going to be. It's going to be a different story, right? It's not going to be.
I mean, I think it's going to be relatively close. They did talk about that they're going to take the Queen music from that movie and reuse it in the remake.
Nice.
So I suspect it'll be similar, but maybe they won't, because that first story was fantastic.
Oh yeah.
They ruined it with the second movie. They just basically said the first one never happened. It was never relevant, which was dumb. Right. But yeah,
which they had to do to make a second one.
Yeah. Is there any 80s movie you think they could remake? See, today it's hard.
But see, is that an? But I think the question is Highlander isn't it's a story made in the 80s. It's not the same thing. Like I think I understand your point, but it's like some of those movies.
I'm talking about movies that came out in the 80s. I'm not talking about.
No. Okay, so think about the John Hughes type movies, right? The
Breakfast Club and others. Yep.
Right. None of those can be made today.
Why not?
They'd have to be. The story would have to be completely changed because
why for like the Breakfast Club? That one I don't get. Why would that have to be remade? What is wrong with it?
Actually, Breakfast Club could be remade,
but it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. But I mean, you're saying.
But the idea is that it like. I wonder how they would have to approach it because I mean, like, look, don't we all know like the issue with a lot of these is that they don't age well. There's some concept.
I disagree. I just don't think society's aged well. There's a difference.
That's true.
That's my perspective, but
to a point. I mean, some of those when you watch them again, you're like, all right, I could see some of that stuff is a little bit borderline.
Name one, because I want people to get a sense of what you're thinking about. Like, what's one movie you'd say?
What movie?
Like, I have a few right off the bat that I know people would get a little
was that 80s or was that 90s where he paid the girl to be his girlfriend? Was that 90s with McDreamy, the guy from
Can't Buy Me Love? That was 80s. Yeah. That was 80s. Yeah.
I thought that was 90s.
He needed to be his girlfriend because he was a nerd and he wanted to be popular. And I actually don't think that would be a bad transition to today because I think it's still true.
Yeah.
Or there wasn't anything bad with it. I mean, it was just more about. I think where you need to go is the comedies. The comedies are where it gets a little trickier.
That's probably more what I'm thinking. I'm thinking
like a lot of Mel Brooks movies people talk about, like Blazing Saddles.
Absolutely not.
I think that's a fantastic movie, by the way, for anybody who hasn't seen it.
There's only wait. The only ones that can do that type of movie would be Trey Parker and Matt Stone, who do South Park. They're the only ones who actually probably can do it, or like a Chappelle or somebody like that. Somebody who's already kind of taken on that establishment of going kind of against the grain of the normal trend of things and how people get canceled, and to show that they can't get canceled.
Well, that was the whole thing. It's just kind of making fun of society and history and things in general, taking some of that humor from the past and throwing it to the front. And that's why I always get a kick out of, like, people say Blazing Saddles wouldn't be made today. I disagree. It could be. Maybe it wouldn't be the exact same movie, but I think they'd make it more relevant to what's going on today, with the comedy behind it.
Yeah.
And even if they did, again, it's people have to have a sense of everybody's too sensitive. Like, there's just too much and I take that back. Not everybody's sensitive. A minority is super sensitive, makes their voice known, and everybody seems to think that's the feeling for everyone else, and it's not. But
it's the bulk minority.
One. Airplane might be exactly. Airplane might be although that, again, great movies. I mean, you could say most of the early age. Revenge of the Nerds actually is one you probably would have to redo.
That one, that one definitely, because he basically did a sexual assault to her at the end. It's funny because you don't think about it, right? We grew up with it.
When you watched it, no, you think it's funny, right?
Right. You don't think about it in that context back then, but I remember a few years ago somebody brought it up. I was one of those like, shit, he really did, didn't he?
Oh yeah.
Right, that was like not even consent. That was sexual assault.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, it was, yeah.
He faked who he was to get to the girl. And it all worked out okay, but in reality, in today's world, people would look at that.
Actually, you know what? I keep on thinking about Breakfast Club. That actually would, I think, with if you had somebody not with an agenda, that Breakfast Club can be a really good adaptation to today's world, for today's high school.
It'd be, yeah.
If they decided to not go with a certain agenda, if they actually went after, like, the one thing nice thing about Breakfast Club, there was nobody quote unquote right in Breakfast Club, right? Everybody was kind of had
they
their
had
own
all their
thought.
own issues, and that was the
Right.
catch of it.
That was the catch of it. And I think that the issue would be is, depending upon who made that today, that you can't have somebody not, have somebody safe, right?
Right.
You can't have somebody who is untouchable. It's like you have to look at everybody in there, like, and go after those stereotypes or go after those things that, like, is wrong with different backgrounds and so on. But yeah, actually, the more I think about it, Breakfast Club would actually be an awesome one. I think
Yeah.
I think it could be done. I mean, but I think it would have to have somebody who is looking at really, tearing apart everybody in a positive. I mean, in the end, in a positive way, right? I don't mean tearing them
Right.
apart, but I mean, in the beginning, like the first half of it, you see how screwed up they all are, and then they
Right.
start to come together and find their similarities, and that they're not that as different as they think. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. That'd be
Like
a
it's,
good one.
but to be honest with you, I don't want them to remake it. It's fine as it is. Like, why remake it? Like, that's the other thing I
Yeah,
have a problem with is, like,
true.
and
Well,
Hollywood
what are they
consistently
called? Like the lunch group or something instead. Like, just go with that concept though, of in detention,
fine.
or they're put in that type of situation where you know they have a common enemy or something, to rebel against. But I think
Yeah.
it'd be a good concept. But yeah, I mean, trying to remake it, I think that's the problem. I think remakes, unless you're going to do an actual one-to-one remake, you know, either go with a brand new story, just branch off and maybe use the concept, but don't call it the same thing. I don't call it Breakfast Club if it's not Breakfast Club all over again.
Yeah. I find it interesting, like, for those who've never seen it. So, the whole Fast series and whatever, Fast and Furious and all that, the car
Yeah,
racing. I
yeah.
mean, that was the original concept behind it, was car racing. And of course, the whole, undercover cop scenario. So there was more to it than just that. But the first one was fantastic. After that,
I
it was
love
just
that.
more about pulling money. Um,
I watched up until like 5 and 6. Like 6 was the last one I really watched.
yeah,
Like 5 I loved.
it started to lose, like, reality, which is, understandable when you get that deep into a franchise, you start losing.
They
But
totally did on
one
One Up.
franchise I'd love to see make a return that they could do today, Cannonball Run.
That'd be interesting. That'd be a good one.
Because for those who
With
don't know,
modern cars
Cannonball
and
Run,
everything.
had
Yeah.
2 movies, 1 and 2, based back in the 80s, and it's basically just a race. It's a race where a bunch of people, mostly, they're supposed to be unknown people, but they know each other within the community,
Yeah.
are racing from one point in the country to another within 24 hours. And the first one to get there wins, like, $1 million or whatever the number is. So um, that's one of those things where I think that could be a good addition,
Yeah.
is to see them do that, because you could get actors today. I mean, they went from anyone. I mean,
Well,
back
they had
then
a lot of well-known actors. They had a lot of. I
they
mean,
did.
they had
Yeah,
Sammy Davis and
Dean Martin,
Dean
Burt
Martin,
Reynolds,
Burt Reynolds. Yeah, they had Jackie Chan.
yeah,
Yeah,
Roger Moore. Yeah, I mean,
Roger
all
Moore.
the
They
popular
had a lot of
franchises
big
during
names.
that 80s were who they grabbed. People well known up to or in the 80s time
Yeah,
period were, so that would be fun to watch, because
and the
they could
cars
do that again.
were really cool. Like
Yeah,
the idea of they had all these like special cars that in the movie. That'd be an interesting one, and especially with the twist, because like back then, like they didn't, they were only working on radios, right? But now with like, it's not just they have the internet and the ability to be able to communicate and monitor things, but also the law enforcement does as well.
yep,
Yeah, actually, that'd be an interesting one. That'd actually be kind of cool. Kind of
yeah.
like have a modern day twist on it.
I think so. I think it'd be
Yeah,
an interesting one. I definitely would want to see it. I mean, I think the opportunity's there. I mean, you could even bring Jackie Chan back
yeah.
as the older statesman driver at this point for his
Right. Or like
sport.
he's like a billionaire now, and he's restarting it again,
Yeah,
something like
yeah,
that. Like one of
exactly.
those twists. Yeah,
Yeah. So they had some interesting ones, but that's another good one.
that's a good one.
But yeah, but like I
What about
said, I mean, there's what's that?
what about like the like I said, like outside of Breakfast Club, is there any like romance ones that you'd want?
That's a great question. Like, back in the 80s, did I watch a lot of romance movies? Probably not.
True.
I mean, only romance comes to my mind is more of a romance adventure, like Romancing the Stone,
I was just thinking that one.
Jewel of the Nile, right?
Yeah.
Um, Those kind of come to mind.
Yeah. You didn't watch really any of the John Hughes type genres,
Well,
like the
that's true.
16 Candles and so
But I
on?
feel like they're like comedies, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
16 Candles is more a comedy.
yeah. It
So
was
all John Hughes movies were basically comedies, Ferris Bueller and others.
kind of wrapped up in a romantic type background.
Sure.
Like
Yeah,
my
there was
favorite,
always something tied to that. Yeah.
yeah, my favorite was Some Kind of Wonderful. I remember that one. Really like that story. That's my
That's
favorite one.
right. Forgot about that. Who
They had some
started that
great lines
again?
in that. Huh?
Who started that again?
Mary Stuart Matherson. Oh God, Leah Thompson, and I'm blanking on the guy. I don't
Got
remember
it.
his name, but he was another one of the Brat Pack type guys. That young group of guys.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Dude, but here's one that came to my mind just out of curiosity. Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
That you
You do
probably
something like
might
that.
do, but there might be some things that are a little bit, yeah, just not be able to do. That'd be a good one though.
Yeah, I think most of it. I mean, if you
All
base
right.
it off today, then it would be. Oh,
What
you're
about
thinking
action
of
movies?
what's that?
What about action movies? I mean, think about the genre back then. You know,
That
we're
was
talking about
huge.
the Schwarzenegger ones. I mean,
I
I
mean,
think
who
my
dominated back
issue
in the
was,
80s,
huh?
right? Who were the dominating action adventure stars in the 80s? It was really only two.
Stallone, Schwarzenegger really were the main ones.
That
You
was
had
it.
kind of like in the 80s, 90s, Bruce Willis did a
Well,
lot of
Bruce
action
Willis
movies.
was loosely primarily for Die Hard.
Yeah, yeah. He
Like, I
did a
can't think of
few,
any
but
other action movies that cared for him. Tom Cruise always done action movies, but
well, did he do it?
he didn't
Yeah,
do it in the 80s. You're right. He didn't do it in the
in the
80s.
80s. I mean, of course, Top Gun's 100% an action movie, but yeah, it wasn't as much about the planes as it was But yeah, like I think you could do that. Like some of the things like Predator probably be a good one. But
But they've
my
done a few of those in the future since then.
yeah,
Not a remake, but they've done basically Predator movies since then.
the problem is that just with them, they don't have. I mean, with it, the stunts and the technology that we had in the 80s, which was limited. They had to rely on the story, and how many great lines were from like Predator and all those other movies, right? So you had them telling the story, and they didn't rely on it. And I think that's why like some of the movies fall flat nowadays. Like, and even how what people's expectations are. Like going to Marvel, like I actually really like Thor, the first one, right? I actually like it, but people rag on it because there's not a lot of action. There wasn't that much. It was one of the earlier movies, and they didn't really have much to it in terms of action and everything. But
Well,
I like
considering
the
Iron
story.
Man and Captain America had come before that,
Yeah,
Captain America was really based on in present uh, times as far as
yeah,
not a lot of CGI, more of like real world type places and things like that. So it kept
yeah,
it more something that people could relate to more as far as being that time period and feeling like it was really there. Which is Thor
yeah.
was like fantasy living out in Asgard,
Right.
and Iron Man was similar to Captain America, although he had an iron suit, so that was a significant difference there. But I
Such a
agree with you. I think
go
I love
badass.
Thor. I like the first Thor. I thought it was really well done. But you're right. It didn't. I think expectations were high
I
for what
think
they
they
were.
were high. I think the like I love and hate the final fight scene because I love the fact when he gets his hammer back. That's like to me, that's like up there. Maybe not end game type up there,
Mhm.
where bring me Thanos type, but it was an awesome scene. Like, but I thought the fight was a little bit lacking.
Yeah.
But I love and hate that scene.
Yeah.
But,
Well, there's so much material they can pull from comics. I mean, 80s had a lot of different stories, different
yeah,
comics out there at the time. And just like today's comics are so vast, there's a lot of different varying companies now that exist because back then it was
yeah,
mostly Marvel and DC.
that's
You
all there
either
was.
went through Marvel or you went through DC. Nowadays, you've got so many others out there,
Yeah,
which is nice. It keeps, availability open. That's why you see shows like The Boys
yeah,
or Invincible,
yeah,
fantastic superhero
yeah.
takes, which go a completely different route than what everybody's used to when you grew up in the 80s and 90s, which is
Hmm.
you're either good or bad. Like the good guys were good, the bad guys were bad.
Yeah,
Whereas today, the boys, the supposed good guys, are actually bad.
yeah.
You just don't see it because it's a person, they have this belief to maintain this sort of perception in the public eye. But they're
Right.
all evil people.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
not all of them, but a good bulk of them are. So
It always reminds me of like Dungeons and Dragons, where it's not, you don't have good evil, you have like lawful, chaotic. You
yeah,
have that where it's not just because you're one thing doesn't mean that it's great. Like lawful doesn't always just mean that you're perfect.
yeah,
You or that you're good. You can actually be very bad and be lawful as well.
yeah.
That type of thing. But I think that's like the one thing about like some of the storylines today. They just don't feel like they actually have a story to them. Like they rely on like the whole idea of the multiverse. Like I don't know if you've seen like South Park the Into the Panderverse, but like the
Yeah.
reliance now on like multiverse and all these things is, I thought it was great like when they introduced it, but it's to the point now where it's like it's annoying to me.
Yeah, but comics have
It
done multiverse for decades. That's the funny
yeah, but
part. It's like it's nothing new in concept. It's just because they're pushing it more as the story. I
yeah,
agree with you. It's just people are just running empty to it. Like they're just not as excited about it
right.
because it also doesn't tie into any particular thing. There's no central
That's it.
point because
Yeah.
you're jumping across everything.
And the
Um,
fact that like, it one of the things that not bothers me, but it's kind of disappointing, like for like if you really think about it, when you have this multiverse, Tony Stark's sacrifice or Black Widow or whoever, it's I think when you have a multiverse, it's like, well, there's another Tony Stark. You can easily have another Iron Man with uh Downey Jr. because you can just say, oh, he's from a different multiverse. It just makes the one thing about like a lot of those when you look at like the death, like going back to the Thor thing where he was going to sacrifice himself, there's a finality about it. Like there's always that sacrifice that like how I am. I like the superheroes that are very imperfect. The Daredevil, the Punisher, the ones that can die, that aren't invincible, that don't really have major powers, because that threat of them dying or losing is always very real for them. They have to actually think about it. It's not like, and I'm not going to go into Ragnar, but like kind of like Captain Marvel just going, I'm going to go beat up Thanos. It's like knowing her from the comic book, you kind of go, yeah, she probably could do it, but there doesn't seem like there's that edge where she may not be able to, or can she, or what's her strategy has to be. Where a lot of times, like in those type of movies or those scenes where it just seems like they're just going in and attacking without thinking, where you know I always like the idea that they have to actually have strategy, and or else the end result is that they'll die.
yeah,
But kind
well,
of like the multiverse,
yeah. Well,
just
and
got
to
to
your
lose that.
point, I think that's why if you go back, remember the Greatest American Hero?
Oh yeah,
So 80's sort of
I'd
television
sing the
genre.
theme song, but nobody wants to hear me sing.
Yeah, believe it
No,
or not, we don't want to hear
yeah.
you sing it. So,
No, no,
uh,
no, no. I believe it.
yeah,
Yeah, nobody
yeah.
wants to hear that.
It only lasted 2 years. I think it was only 2 seasons for that one.
But that
But
was a great concept.
it was the
Yeah,
concept was basically an alien race dropped this super suit off that when he put it on, he had the ability to fly, he was indestructible. Basically the suit gave him all his powers. When he
like
didn't have the
Superman.
suit on, he was just a normal human.
Yeah,
Not like Superman where he hides himself, he's still Superman underneath.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but that only lasts 2 years, and it was funny because he could never fly, so you could always see him, he's, like, struggling to fly correctly, always a challenge.
He didn't read the instruction manual.
No, he lost the instruction
He
manual in the
liked the
first
instruction manual.
episode, and so his whole thing was, like, lost. But, I mean, that was, like, one of the first few superhero type shows that popped up
Yeah.
on top outside of The Incredible Hulk, the TV series Incredible Hulk,
Oh yeah, yeah. With Ferrigno. Yeah.
or even the $6 Million Man who was sort of
Was that
he wasn't
superhero?
your traditional comic superhero,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but he was a superhero
I
in a
would call him.
sense.
Yeah, I would call him a
Yeah,
superhero. More
and
in
he
like the Punisher vein of superheroes who, well, I had the ability to, so I'm going to do something with it. Yeah.
exactly.
Well, of course, there was also Wonder Woman.
Oh, yes. Let's not forget that one. That's true. That was another
I
good one.
actually saw a clip of Linda Carter in that costume, and let's just say, as a young boy in the '80s, that was
Yeah, it's like one of those pin-up posters for a lot of young boys, so to speak, right?
yeah,
It's like yeah, but I
yeah,
guess the point is like those were more grounded series to your point. Grounded in a sense because they didn't have CGI.
right.
So, I mean, even The Incredible Hulk, I mean, it's all CGI driven because he's a massive monster in a sense. so you have to. But back then, you had Lou Ferrigno just dressing up in all
Which
green.
was a good
He was a
idea.
big
I mean,
guy. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, he's like 6'4", 6'5".
Yeah, he
I
was a
think he's taller
massive
than that.
guy.
He's
Yeah,
ma
yeah.
yeah,
Um,
competed in Olympia how many years? Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
but he
actually, no, we gotta go back even further. The first one definitely was Batman.
true. Well, I'm talking about 80's, but if you wanna go further
Yeah,
back,
80s.
right,
I'm just saying though,
60's.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
but I mean,
Batman and
even
Robin.
even Wonder Woman was like 70s, I think, wasn't it?
70's to early 80's, yeah, yeah. Same with Incredible Hulk, I think it started end of 70's, early
Yeah,
80's. Um,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, you're right, there's it's Batman and Robin, right?
But
That
again,
was
it was just cut scenes where they would look like they're throwing a punch and the guy would just fly backwards,
yeah.
you know?
The
That was
best
their
part is
CGI.
yeah, well, and the thing I loved about Batman and Robin is, like, every time they're climbing up a building, they're really walking straight on the floor, and someone's just underneath and pops open a window like they're actually looking out the window to talk to them,
Yeah,
and they're just pulling themselves up, but they're really walking in a straight,
yeah,
flat
yeah.
floor. But, again, camera angles and how they perceive it is like, "Oh, that's pretty cool."
Yeah,
And, like, today, they would probably have an actual climber,
or
or
just
they
CGI.
would just do CGI. Yeah, exactly, from a distance, which is kinda what they do.
I mean, yes, it's better, but I think that's like the one thing that you kind of really miss was the fact that when you look back at Star Wars, right, and especially Star Wars, because when Star Wars first came out, it just wasn't that it was a good story. It was holy crap, what did they do? How did they do all that? Not just like how Yoda was a puppet, right? Like, and then all the scenes, the stop frame animation that they did and everything that they did and how they made the sounds. That was an art. I mean, CGI is cool and all, but like you had Michael
The
Bay
models they built,
recently.
yeah, all the
Yeah,
models they built for everything.
that's it was art. I mean, but like Michael Bay recently talked about, how CGI, is just it's too easy. It doesn't really take any skill to do it. And I don't want to bring down, again, we all love CGI. I mean, it's made things so much better. Like it's given us things that we never would have had in the past. But still, I think that I do miss the idea that all of that stuff that we saw, all the makeup design and all that, the mask that they did was an artist, somebody who had amazing skill to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah. I
yeah,
mean, today's comic book, to live up to what comics actually have, CGI is a must because you
oh
can't
yeah, yeah,
achieve anything without it. And it
right.
helps. And so, back to your point originally, like with the multiverse and everything, like I think it just came down to so much now is coming up. Like, you're not living in the real world. I mean, yes, they stage them in sense in real world, but all
Yeah,
the CGI and where they have to go, it's hard for people to kind of keep in touch and want to watch it versus, the lack of technology back in the 80's, 70's and whatnot. You had to
easier to keep
think
up.
through and you had to get more creative. Like you
Yeah.
really had to think through. Not saying CGI isn't creative because it is all the computer work and whatnot they would
Oh,
go
it is.
to
Yeah,
try and
yeah,
make it look real, but just the creativity to attempt a scene, to present what you want to present in a story, and how it can be appear on a TV screen or a movie
yeah.
is key. And to your point, Star Wars, when it came out, I mean, the only other thing you really had to base it off of against was Star Trek. It was a
Yeah,
totally different play compared to Star Trek.
totally.
Um, where Star Trek was more week to week story, each one was unique. Star Wars is just, as Lucas put, a giant space opera, right?
Mhm.
That's the whole point of what it is.
It was also
Um,
the look and feel. I mean,
yeah,
Star
the
Trek
story was
was what
great.
it was. It was clean, it was whatever, but there was an idea that even though it's far more advanced than anything that we have, that it was also like a Western,
Yeah.
It had that feel of it being old.
If you look in Star Wars, the only colorful things that exist in there is really the lightsabers and the flight
Yeah,
suits, and that's it.
yeah,
Everything else is just neutral colors. Like
yeah,
there's
and
nothing
run
really special.
down
Your
and
blacks, your whites, your
yeah,
grays, the browns. That's it.
yeah,
And so it's very, to your point, it just kind of kept you sort of connected because it just seemed more real.
yeah.
And
That
all the colorful lights and colors and everything weren't really trying to grab your attention. It was just part of it. And so you didn't really think about it.
I think, like, for the Phantom Menace, that was one of the things that I thought that and Lucas even said himself that he was able to do things that he wasn't able to do in the 80's, 70's, and 80's, right? Where he kinda went overboard with some of the look and feel of the universe. Like, he had all these tools at his disposal, and he was just like a kid in a candy store.
Well, and that's why this is one of the only times I'll say this. The thing I liked about what J.J. Abrams did do is he did go back
He
to
did
the
go back.
original trilogy because he wanted to actually build the alien costumes and all that stuff and make it feel more real than using CGI. So I'll give him that because that was important. That's what
I
helped
agree. I agree.
Mandalorian is the same way. Ahsoka was the same way. Andor is the same. I mean, they've all now focused more on trying to stick more to what Star Wars, the original trilogy, was, which is build your characters. They still use CGI sets for a lot of the stuff, but in today's technology, you don't know it's real anyway, so it actually works well. But for character interactions, it's less about these animated characters.
Yeah.
So you feel it's more real when they're together.
And that's fine. Like I said, I don't. I mean, my whole thing about saying the artists and everything, I think it's just one of those things. It's a nostalgia thing, but it's also just an appreciation for the people who made that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that CGI in a lot of ways, look, if you could do the same thing with CGI, then it totally makes sense to do it that way. It's how much cheaper, how much faster, how much more flexibility you have if you need to make a change or whatever, where you can't do that with the old costume sets. So yeah, it makes sense. It's just when there becomes a reliance on it, a dependency, that it's like when you look at some of the stuff, like when they first did Doctor Strange, Doctor Strange needed CGI, right? I mean, to be able to do Doctor
magic
Strange,
and stuff, you kind of almost need it. Yeah,
you need it. Yeah, I mean, it would be it would fall really flat without it. But I mean, that really needs it. But when you see some of the ones now, and it's just the reliance on it is just so heavy in place of the story. That's always where I have the issue when the story gets replaced with CGI. It's I mean, the biggest one to me was Transformers. Now I grew up with
Transformers.
Yeah.
I'll say the last. I mean, Transformers has to be CGI because they're not going to build an actual Transformer.
I agree.
But to your point, the last couple, Bumblebee was fantastic, well done.
Yeah.
And the last one, which the Beast Wars one or whatever one it was, that was another fantastic one done because they blended it well. They didn't overdo it, but they have to for what they had in place.
Right.
But yeah, those were well. But I agree with you. Even Michael Bay just was over. Of course, with Michael Bay, it's a challenge, right? Because he loves to blow shit up all the time. So every scene has to have something explode. There has to be explosions, and you lose track at that point because there's always a battle, there's always explosions, less story.
Yeah.
Whereas the last two have had more story.
Yeah.
Than the first ones really did.
Yeah, Bumblebee is my favorite one.
Yeah,
by far. I mean, that was a good story. I'm not sure if that was Haley's first big movie.
Well, she was part of Ender's Game.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So she was in Ender's Game. So I think that was her bigger one.
That was a big one before. You're
right.
You're right. Good call.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I really like her as an actress. When you see the character starting to get replaced in Marvel, you kind of wonder. But I like that. I like her version of how she's getting it because she's not Hawkeye. She's her own character, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, Kate Bishop.
I really like her.
Yeah.
Kate
Bishop, that was. I thought that was a good series with the two of them. To be honest,
that was a great series, and especially with God, I'm blanking on her name.
Pugh.
Yeah.
Yes, who plays Black Widow's sister?
Yeah.
But
sorry, I blank on everything. So yeah, people are going to start commenting. If anybody ever watches it, they're going to start commenting how I have absolutely no memory for names.
Yep. So let me ask you this. I know we spent a lot on kind of dovetailed into movies and everything. Kind of went through that. Kind of already talked about Marvel and Star Wars last episode, and we've kind of come back, but in a different perspective. So I like that. I think we're going a different route.
Who cares?
So focusing
nobody's listening. So it's just us.
Oh, I think we have at least 5, maybe 10.
Really?
Nice. And I don't know.
Doubled.
I'm not worried about right now. We'll drive clicks. Don't worry.
Yeah, we'll see.
If we want to drive clicks, we just make outrageous comments.
Right.
Which maybe we are for some people, but that's different.
Whatever.
What's the one thing? I'm going to ask you this final question because I'm curious. What's the one thing you remember in the 80s that you wish was back?
Oh, arcades. And it's not the idea of the arcades. And to clarify, to me, it's what it meant to us. It
Hmm.
was it was a place where people gathered, like you would see people from school or whatever, because we didn't have Discord. My like I think going piggybacking on how things were during the pandemic, like my sons had Discord. So they were able to talk to their friends, and even if they weren't playing a game, they were able to just hop on together and or like constantly keep in communication with each other through it. And it could be just random stuff, or they would go on and play a game. But for
Sure.
us, I was an arcade. So I think for me, I mean, maybe not as an adult, I would care as much. Um, but yeah, I mean, I really miss how arcades were because you and I spent how much time and money in arcades. It was just a part of what it was. Having your name up on as a high score. It was, mine was easy. I put LEN.
Right. Yeah. Because you only got 3 letters
Yeah,
generally.
and you would put JDW.
Pretty
It was
much.
just, yeah, you have your initials. So it was just one of those things where it was. I don't think kids today can really understand what arcades meant to us back then. How like when like because my grandmother, I would go with my grandmother to the mall by her house, and it was you'd have like $2.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, depending on how much money you had, like, would determine what game you played.
Yeah.
Like there are some games that you knew that you can last longer on, that you can survive.
Yep.
You
What
know,
was your favorite arcade game? Since you brought up arcades, what is the one if you had every single game in an arcade that you could play, what's the one you're looking for to play
it's
most?
behind you. Star Wars. The Star Wars one where you could go between all three different movies. You remember that one?
Yeah, that came out later. Yeah.
That came out later. That was my all-time favorite one.
Well, I know you used to play Return of the Jedi all the time.
Yeah, I used to love Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
That
That
was
I
my
know.
favorite.
For
But I
me,
still like going back to the first one.
yeah. Well, yeah, the first one's always the best one. Um, I would say for me, it's Tron, which is just right here.
Yeah.
So Tron would be my favorite, but I also love the world of Tron. We can do a discussion about that down the road. But um,
I don't
but yeah, I
remember the
agree with
name.
you.
Yeah,
Arcades are pretty.
we'll definitely have to research because I don't remember fucking any of the names. I have the image in my head what they are, but I'd have to have the list right next to me, or else it's just gonna be. But actually, we should have that as a segment, like talking about all those arcade ones and ones that we really miss. And
Yeah.
like there's like the like
How about the football? You and I. So
John Elway
I and I
football.
used to play John Elway football, and literally all we
Oh,
would do.
there's two of them, two football games.
That's true. The John Elway one was the one we played where
Oh, a ton.
we would just the way it was set up is we on offense I would just run up the field or Len was I can't remember who the receiver was and we just chuck it deep every time run and dive to catch the ball.
Yeah,
We put up like 80 points in the game. We eventually got top of the scoreboard after like a
because
couple
remember
weeks.
you had a salary. You
Yeah,
had your whatever your salary was. It wasn't just high score, and it was
right.
an ongoing salary that you can add to.
Yeah, you could
Yeah,
always exactly. That was one of the first few times where you can continue to add into. So as you came
yeah,
back and played again, you used your initials and
yeah.
whatnot, and then you could add more to that total score. So we ended up passing. The other game you're probably talking about is Cyberball,
Oh yeah, but that
which
was the one
was
we did head to head.
yeah,
Cyberall was awesome.
Cyberball was a fantastic
Yeah,
game.
your
That's
robot was
one
like
I'd
about
love
to
to
make
have in
explode.
my little home arcade is Cyberball.
Kind of big though.
Well, you can do
But yeah,
just a
the two
2-player
spots.
one, but if I got the 4-player, yeah, that would be
The four
slightly
player one
different.
definitely would take up too much space.
Agreed, agreed.
Yeah,
Although I
there's
do
a
get
lot of
my kids have played a lot of these old games because, well, one because I have the arcades behind me now, but two just because growing up I always played a lot of them and they watched and then I'd have them play along, and so
yeah,
I'd say my kids are pretty well versed in a lot of the historical games that have
nice.
existed in the past.
Actually, the one that I would probably get is 1942
Oh
would be
yeah,
another one. I
or Time
love it.
Pilot, which is basically the same thing, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. 1943. Um, and then some of the side scrolling ones. I'm blanking on the names of some of them. Kind of like
Sinistar, dude, you loved playing Sinistar
oh, no, that used to scare the shit out of me.
or Crossbow. I remember playing Crossbow with
Oh
you all the
yeah.
time. See, I mean,
Oh
there's lots of different games. I could start labeling off a few of them.
yeah, yeah. Track and field, of course, for you.
Oh yeah, because that was one I always knew I could win. So
Yeah.
I to your point earlier, like I could put a quarter in and make that last for a while.
Remember the pencil cheat? And then they started
Yeah,
putting the cover over the button so you couldn't do the pencil
yeah,
cheat.
it's all right. I
Yeah,
figured I just was able. Yeah, exactly. The pencil cheat
yeah,
was the first one. and the
Yeah.
covers slowed it down. But as long as you were quick, you could still beat
Yeah.
them, which people could do.
Another one that I always liked playing was Year Kung Fu.
Yeah.
Remember that one? You just bounce back and forth, and you had to find whatever their patterns were?
Yep.
I used to love
I,
that one too.
I have that on the Nintendo Switch. That's what I
Yeah.
love about some of the console game systems now.
Yeah.
They bring back emulations of the old arcade games,
Right.
like Air Kung Fu, Karate, whatever. Karate was fun. I played that with my youngest son, and he ended up beating me.
Yeah.
The whole flip over, swing, that whole thing, which is, by the way, in the movie Bloodsport. So if you're
Yeah.
ever curious, another great 80s movie, which that's one they could possibly remake. Um, but yeah, there's so
Yeah.
many arcade games. But for me, the one thing I wish they'd come back and it would be drive-throughs or drive-ins. Drive-ins, not
Yeah.
drive-throughs. Drive-throughs exist, but drive-ins for movie theaters were always fun
Yeah.
because you
They
could
have
watch
them.
two movies.
They're not as like my on Halloween, my son's girlfriend, she's really big into Halloween. That's her favorite holiday, is Halloween. And so they went to go. I don't know what they went to see, but they went to a drive-in on Halloween to go watch something.
Nice.
So we still have one kind of nearby us. So they're here, but they're not. To your point, they're just not as popular anymore.
No, and when the pandemic came, if those had existed, movie theaters could have continued to show movies
Yep.
because then people would have been in their cars.
Yeah, they would have been isolated.
And you would have just had to change the snack situation. I'm sure that would have been the challenge. But
Yeah,
it's like if you can make it these things experiences,
yeah.
like you could get people to go back to those because it's just a historical time past type of thing where those are fun. You can enjoy them. It's good. It's not as expensive because you're bringing your car in.
You have to just find a way to make it more like how do you evolve it, right? Like recently, they do it over, the airwaves. You don't have the speaker box. Remember, like when we went to drive-ins, you'd have that speaker box. You'd pull
Right.
up next to it, put the speaker box, but now you go over your radio to do it.
Yep.
So I think there's little things like that where they're doing it to improve it. But I mean, there are just also some movies that you're not going to want to watch at a drive-in. They're just, they're going to lose its appeal. Like most of the Marvel movies, it would be hard to watch.
Depends on yeah, you're right, because
Yeah,
that came to my mind, like the lighting, right? Some of the problems was always when a car would drive by and the light would just flash across real
right.
quick when they're supposed to turn their friggin' headlights off and they didn't.
And
Um,
especially with the white lights people have now,
yeah, that's true.
ways too bright. But yeah.
But I think that's another one. But yeah, no, I think to your point, like arcades, I'd love to bring an arcade back, as you know. So that's one
Yeah,
for
yeah.
me. 100% on board with you on that one. But
I
yeah,
just have to modernize it. I mean, I think that's the whole thing. It's like we're not going to bring back the arcades to how they were in the 80s. It's
no,
just not necessary anymore. I mean, in the 80s, um, arcades were the pinnacle. I mean, they were the top technology. The 2600, 5200, NES, any of those were not even close to being arcade. Even your top, when PC gaming became big in the 90s. I remember like with the Amiga coming up and all of those that they just still couldn't compete with arcades. But right when we got to like the PlayStation, like right around that era is where you started seeing consoles starting to get better than uh, arcades, and then
yeah,
PCs just went above it. Like it wasn't even close anymore.
right.
So I think there has to be an evolution for arcades to come back. You know,
Agreed. I mean, there has to be a combination of things to exactly what you listed out, all the different variations to show over time. It'll help give people a sense of the past versus the present, and, give them opportunity to kind of compare too, which
VR
is what we
experience
should
maybe.
do next time too. Is I'm sure we could sit and spend a long time, but really spend a show just focusing on like games of the past versus games today, where similarities exist. I mean,
Yeah,
visually, yes, there's a total difference from that
that's not
standpoint,
the point though.
but I think we should spend more time on that, and that would be a good one as well.
That would be good. Yeah.
Yeah, so this has been great. It's a good
Yeah.
conversation. I think that hopefully everybody enjoyed today's show. We went a little bit around, but overall,
Yeah.
hopefully we got something
I think
useful out
the
of it.
theme was the same, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
It's like how we can appreciate the past and also appreciate the present.
exactly. We're the Gen X guys. We're always going to somewhat live in the past and live in the present, but
Yeah.
well, like any generation, you kind of defer back to somewhat you remember in the past. So,
Yeah,
um,
comfort. Yeah.
but yeah,
Nostalgia.
exactly. So if you like the show, definitely subscribe and
Yeah.
listen each week. We'll put a new episode out, and we'll be back next week. So everybody have a good week, and we'll talk to you soon.
See ya.